No one expects warmth in a land where the air itself seems to freeze mid-breath. But imagine this, a world where the night sky flashes with icy light, where winds scream across the plains like living spirits, where temperatures plunge to 40 degrees, and where survival is measured not by strength, but by knowledge so ancient that even today it feels like sorcery. Now imagine surviving that winter with no firewood at all. Shocking, isn't it? The kind of shock that makes the mind tighten, the heart beat slower, as if your body itself is trying to understand how such a thing could be possible. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Your comments help this story travel across the night from one listener to another, and remember, if you'd like more journeys into the hidden corners of human history, subscribe to Historical Truth, where the past breathes softly into your dreams. Now, settle in, let the lights dim, let the cold world of long ago North America open before you. The story begins long before cities, before roads, before the world had a name. Winter arrived early that year. Summer had barely loosened its fingers from the tall grasses when ice crystals began forming on the riverbanks. The people of the northern tribes, those who lived where the land stretched into endless sky, knew what this meant. The elders predicted a white silence winter, a winter so cold that even the drums would freeze before their sound could reach the air, a winter where firewood would vanish beneath layers of snow as hard as stone. The people had survived winters like this before, but only barely, and never without loss. Yet this story is not about despair. It is about the breathtaking intelligence, resilience, and ingenuity of Native American communities who lived in places where wood was scarce, snow was endless, and the sun vanished for months at a time. Let us follow one such community, a band of the Inuit northern people who lived among the knife-edge winds of the subarctic, where temperatures plunged to deadly lows and forests thinned into silent tundra. Their village, called Kaskimin, lay near the rim of the frozen Labrador Plateau. From a distance, it looked almost invisible, just small humps in the white landscape like sleeping snow giants. But these humps were no ordinary structures. They were miracles of engineering created without a single nail, a single brick, or a single piece of cut timber. They were winter lodges, built mostly of snow, bone, hide, and earth. Tonight, we begin with a single family living inside one of those lodges, the household of Tanu, a hunter known not for strength, but for patience. His wife, Sura, carried wisdom older than her own voice, skills inherited from generations of women who had kept their people alive through winters that would kill most anyone today. And their young son, Kaha, barely 6 winters old, saw the world with the wide, curious eyes that only a child facing the unknown can have. On the night our story begins, snow fell like ash from a silent sky. Outside their lodge, the wind slashed the land with the precision of a blade, cutting patterns into the drifts. Inside, however, there was no fire, no glowing hearth, no burning logs. Yet the family was warm, not comfortable, not cozy in the sense we imagine today. No, their warmth was a subtle thing, a layered thing. The kind of warmth that felt earned, held carefully, protected like a living being. Their warmth came from knowledge. The lodge they lived in had walls 2 feet thick, made of woven hide stretched over a frame of driftwood and whalebone, then insulated with packed snow and moss. To modern ears this may sound impossible. Snow as insulation? But snow, when compressed, becomes a fortress of tiny locked air pockets, and air, still air, is among the most powerful insulators in nature. Sura had prepared the bedding from layers of cured caribou hide, each hide retaining a hollow hair structure that trapped heat. The family slept together, close enough for warmth to pass between them. Beneath the hides, their breath created a cocoon of warmth that rose slowly and remained trapped beneath the dome-like roof. It was cold enough that each exhale crystallized the moment it touched the air. Yet inside that lodge, the temperature hovered just above freezing, warm enough for survival, safe enough for rest. But warmth alone was not survival. The real danger of a 40-degree winter came from something subtler, something quieter, the exhaustion of the land. In such winters, nothing melted, nothing softened. Snow hardened into cement and the rivers sealed into shining armor. Everything that lived had to fight for breath. That night, as the wind howled, Tanu sat awake, sharpening the edge of a bone spear. Not for hunting, no animal moved in winds like these, but for protection. Predators, starving and desperate, often prowled the edges of human settlements. Wolves, wolverines, even starving bears, their instincts sharpened by hunger. But it was not predators that concerned Tanu most. It was scarcity. Every winter, families measured the days by their supplies: dried meat, pemmican, berries sealed in fat-filled pouches, fish smoked in the autumn sun. They rationed every bite. And when the food ran out, well, the land never gave second chances. Tonight's wind revealed something else too. The first signs that the real winter had begun. The white silence winter had arrived. And so our story begins. On a night when the world was reduced to breath, bone, snow, and knowledge so profound that it allowed entire nations to survive without firewood in a frozen landscape. The morning after the first night of the white silence winter did not look like morning at all. The sky remained the colour of old bone, pale and unmoving, with no trace of the sun behind its frozen veil. The village of Kaskimin lay silent beneath drifts that had grown overnight into sweeping dunes of snow. If any outsider had stumbled across this landscape, they might have mistaken it for uninhabited wilderness. Only the faint humps of snow-covered lodges revealed that life lingered here. Quiet, hidden, enduring. Inside Tanu's lodge, breath misted gently in the cold light. Kaha woke first. Children almost always did. His small hands emerged from the thick cocoon of hides, reaching for the air with sleepy confidence. He knew it would be cold, but not dangerously so. He had grown up in winters harsher than most humans today could imagine. Sura was already awake. She moved quietly, adjusting the hides, checking the cracks between the snow blocks that formed the lodge's windbreak. Every winter morning required these same small rituals passed down through generations who understood that survival depended not on bold actions, but on attentive habits. She pressed her palm to the inner wall. It was cold, but not brittle. Good. The lodge was holding up well. Outside, however, the real test began. Tanu slipped on his fur-lined boots, stitched from caribou hide with sinew thread, and motioned for Kaha to follow. Winter mornings were lessons, every one of them, and today's lesson was one that every child of the northern tribes learned early. How to find warmth in a world without wood. When Tanu pushed aside the snow-packed door covering, a spear of icy wind sliced into the lodge. For a moment Kaha winced. The cold felt alive, almost aware. But after a few breaths, he steadied himself and stepped out beside his father. The world was a white labyrinth. Hills they had walked across the previous day were now soft mounds shaped by the wind. The air tasted sharp, metallic. Each inhale felt like swallowing needles. And yet, as they walked, Kaha noticed something strange. Something he had noticed many times before. His father moved with such calmness, such certainty, that even the brutal cold seemed less threatening simply because Tanu faced it without fear. In truth, the tribes had many ways of creating warmth where others would find none. One method was the structure they lived within, but another was less obvious, more ingenious, and Kaha would learn it today. Tanu stopped near a snowdrift taller than a man. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what do you feel?" Kaha frowned. The wind whipped at his hood. His face stung. His breath froze. Yet something else lingered. A stillness. A pocket of calm in the chaos. "Shelter," he whispered. Tanu nodded. Snow, when shaped by the wind and packed by its own weight, could form natural windbreaks far more effective than any wooden wall. The tribes knew how to read the land, how to find these formations, how to see the difference between deadly drifts and the ones that offered life. The coldest killer of a 40 Duras winter was not temperature alone, it was wind. Wind stripped warmth from a body faster than mere freezing air ever could. Tanu pressed his hand against the drift. "Inside here," he said, "the wind cannot reach, and where the wind cannot reach, a man may survive." Kaha looked up at the wall of snow uncertain. "No fire?" he asked. "No fire," Tanu replied. "Only air, only the land." He showed Kaha a small opening near the drift's base, one he had carved earlier that season. Inside was a hollow chamber, barely big enough for 2 men to crawl into, but sealed tightly with snow blocks from all sides. A snow shelter, a place warmer than the air outside, a place built not with wood, but with knowledge. Tanu ducked inside first, then gestured for Kaha to follow. The moment the boy entered, he understood. The biting wind ceased. The air felt still. Though still cold, it was unmistakably warmer than outside. Warmer by many degrees, enough to save a life. Kaha's eyes widened. "It's warm," he whispered, amazed. Tanu smiled. "Snow steals warmth from the wind, but it holds the breath of living beings. You will remember this." This was the heart of winter survival in the far north, understanding that the land, even when frozen, provides. But survival required more than shelters. There were bodies to feed, water to drink, clothing to prepare, traps to mend. No firewood meant that heat for cooking and melting snow had to come from other methods Sura and the other women of the tribe practiced with the unmatched precision. Back at the lodge, Sura was melting snow inside a sealskin pouch. Not over a fire, there was none. Instead, she used heated stones, warmed earlier beneath layers of animal fat and insulating moss. These stones released their heat slowly, enough to soften snow into water without burning precious resources. Her movements were calm, gentle. Wisdom guided her hands. All around her, the tribe followed similar practices, storing heat in stones, insulating lodges with snow and hides, sleeping close to conserve warmth, relying on bone, fat and ingenuity rather than wood. For outsiders, such methods might seem strange, even impossible, but for the people of Kaskimin they were as natural as breathing. Their knowledge was the only barrier between life and death. As Kaha and Tanu crawled out of the snow shelter, the wind rose again, screaming across the tundra like a furious spirit. Tanu lifted Kaha into his arms and held him close, shielding him from the blast. "We will survive this winter," he said softly. "We always do." The White Silence winter had only begun, but so had the lessons that would carry this family and their entire tribe through the coldest months of the year. The winds eased by midday, but only slightly, just enough for the sound of the village to re-emerge from beneath the storm's heavy blanket. In Kaskimin, sound travelled strangely in winter. Some noises vanished into the snow, absorbed instantly. Others seemed to echo for miles. A shout, the crack of shifting ice, the distant call of a raven drifting like a memory across the sky. Inside the lodge, Sura worked quietly, humming a barely audible tune, one older than any memory Kaha possessed. It was a weaving song, a song sung by mothers and grandmothers as they worked hides into tools and clothing. No one knew its original meaning. It had simply existed for hundreds of winters, carrying the rhythm of hands that had shaped survival itself. Kaha listened to his mother's humming as he and Tanu returned to the lodge, brushing snow from their hoods. The sudden warmth, relative though it was, wrapped them like a blanket. There was something about the lodge's silence that felt sacred. Not quietness, but stillness. A stillness that kept fear at bay. Sura glanced up. "You showed him," she said to Tanu. Tanu nodded. He felt the shelter's breath. Kaha puffed out his chest a little, proud. Sura smiled gently and motioned for him to sit. Near her lay a bundle wrapped tightly in hide. When she unrolled it, Kaha's eyes widened with curiosity. Inside were boots, unfinished, their outer layers pale with fresh stitching. But what caught his attention most was the lining. It was soft, warm, thicker than any boot he had worn before. "These," Sura said, "are winter walkers. You will need them." Kaha touched the inner lining and felt its softness. "What animal is this?" he asked. "Caribou," Sura replied. "From the ones harvested in the last moon. Their hair is hollow, like tiny tubes, that traps warmth better than any man-made cloth." This was another core secret of northern survival. Caribou winter hide, unmatched in its insulating power. The people of Kaskimin used every part of the animal, its hide for clothing, its sinew for thread, its antlers for tools, its bones for shelter frames, its fat for lamps, and its meat for food. Nothing was wasted. Waste meant death. Kaha watched as Sura cut another strip of hide with a blade made from sharpened bone. Fireless winters demanded tools unaffected by cold. Metal could crack, wood could warp, but bone remained dependable. Outside, a cluster of villagers gathered near the largest lodge, where the elders met to discuss the winter's beginning. Tanu lifted the hide flap that formed their doorway. "I will join them," he said. "Kaha stays inside. Kaha frowned. But I want to go. It is not time yet, Tanu said gently. Your lessons today are with your mother. Sura nodded, her eyes warm. Come, she said, patting the space beside her. You must learn how to build warmth with your hands. Tanu disappeared into the storm and Kaha sat beside his mother, watching her thread sinew through the boot's outer skin. Sura worked slowly, explaining each step. The cold is not our enemy, she said. Only ignorance is. Winter tests not strength but understanding. She handed Kaha a smaller piece of hide along with the sinew thread. Try, she encouraged. Kaha attempted to stitch the hide the way he'd watched her do countless times. His hands were clumsy, the needle slipped, the thread tangled, but Sura's voice, steady, patient, guided him. Hold the hide tight, keep the stitches close. The smallest gap becomes the first place cold enters. Kaha tried again. This time the stitch held. He grinned. Good, Sura said. Every stitch you make this winter will keep someone warm. As they worked, Sura began another quiet lesson, one less tangible but just as vital. In winters like this, she said, cold lives not only outside. It lives in the mind. It whispers fear. It tells you the storm is stronger than you, that you're small. But those thoughts are as dangerous as frostbite. Kaha looked up at her, listening carefully. How do you stop the cold in the mind? He asked. You remind yourself of who you are, she said softly. You're part of a people who have lived here longer than memory. You carry the strength of hundreds of winters before you. She touched his forehead gently. And you remember that we never survive alone. Kaha felt something warm spark inside him, something deeper than physical heat, a steadiness, confidence. Outside, the elders' voices rose and fell in the wind. Tanu stood among them, silent at first, listening. The gathering was not a council of fear, it was a meeting of minds sharpened by hardship. The eldest among them, Natuk, spoke first. This winter may be like the winter of the ice moon, he said. The rivers are freezing too early, the animals are moving away. A murmur spread. If the herds travel, one hunter said, we will have to move too. But not now, Tanu replied. The storms are too strong. We must stay sheltered until the wind sleeps. Natuk nodded. We will wait, and we will ration. The land will provide again if we respect it. Their discussions continued, about traps, about snow conditions, about signs in the sky. Not a single voice was raised. Their calmness was as powerful as any weapon. When Tanu returned to the lodge, the light was dim. Sura had finished the last stitch on the winter walker boots. Kaha looked up eagerly. Can I wear them? Tanu chuckled. Yes. The boots fit perfectly. Warm, supportive, shaped exactly for his feet. Sura tied them securely. You will use these soon, she said, when your next lesson begins. Kaha felt a thrill of pride. Outside, the first stars began to appear, glimmering like shards of frozen light. The storm eased. The village breathed. And though the cold had not lessened, the people of Kaskimin felt ready. For winter had arrived, and so had their knowledge. Night settled early that day, so early that it felt as though the sun had forgotten the village of Kaskimin entirely. Darkness in these northern lands did not fall like a curtain. It crept, quiet and slow, until one suddenly realized the world had turned into a vast ocean of shadow, lit only by the dim glow of snow reflecting the sky's faint light. Inside the lodge, the family prepared for the long hours ahead. Nights during the white silence winter were not simply times for sleep. They were hours filled with work, stories, preparation, and the quiet rituals that kept a community alive when the world outside tried to still every beating heart. Kaha lay on his stomach near the wall, his breath creating tiny clouds that drifted upward like miniature spirits. His new boots sat beside him, warm, sturdy, the soft fur glistening faintly in the lamplight. Sura had lit a small quulik, a traditional oil lamp carved from stone, fueled not by wood but by animal fat. The flame was small, barely more than a flicker, but its warmth was steady and its light golden. This was how the tribe survived with no firewood. Lamps of fat, carefully rationed, providing just enough heat to thaw water, warm hands, and bring comfort to long winter nights. The lamp crackled quietly. Kaha watched the flame dance. Tanu, Sura said, tell him the story. Tanu raised an eyebrow. Which one? The one of the first winter, Sura replied. He's old enough to hear it. Tanu nodded. He sat cross-legged, his expression solemn yet calm. The flame cast shadows across his face, making him look older, almost ageless, like the ancestors themselves were speaking through him. Kaha rolled closer, eyes wide. This story, Tanu began, was told to me by my father, and to him by his father, and before that, no one knows. It is older than the stars in this sky. He paused, letting the silence settle. It is said that long ago, before humans found their place on this land, winter was not a season, but a creature, a great pale being made of wind and silence. It walked across the world, searching for life to test, and wherever it went, nights grew longer, snows fell deeper, and the breath of living things slowed. Kaha shivered, pulling his hide blanket closer. The creature wanted to see what beings were worthy of this land, so one day it visited the ancestors of our people. They had no wood, no metal, no warm houses. They had only their knowledge and each other. Sura watched Tanu with quiet pride. His voice filled the lodge, not loud, but steady, like a drumbeat beneath the storm. The pale winter spirit tried to freeze them. For 3 days and 3 nights, it wrapped them in a storm that blocked the sun. It took the warmth from the air. It froze the rivers solid. It howled with winds that could tear flesh from bone. Kaha swallowed hard. But the ancestors didn't fear it. They built shelters from snow. They wore hides that trapped their breath. They ate fat that fueled their bodies. They shared warmth and stories and strength. And together, they survived. Tanu leaned forward slightly. When the pale spirit realized it could not break them, it knelt before the ancestors and said, "You have proven yourselves children of this land. You understand that survival comes from knowledge, not fire. You may live here, if you remember what you have learned." Sura spoke softly. "And we have remembered." Kaha felt the truth of that story settle within him like a weight. Whether real or not, it didn't matter. The lesson was the same. This land did not belong to those who wished to conquer it. It belonged to those who listened. Outside, the wind picked up again, long, drawn-out gusts that rattled the hide walls. Kaha pressed closer to his parents. Sura placed a hand gently on his back. "It is only the wind," she murmured. "It speaks. It does not break." After the story came the tasks of the night. Work was never ending in winter. Sura began preparing the next day's food. Tanu examined a set of bone-fishing hooks, smoothing their edges with a stone. Kaha, eager to prove himself useful, took up a piece of hide and continued practicing his stitches, repeating his mother's words, "The smallest gap becomes the first place cold enters." Hours passed quietly. Then a sound outside broke the silence. A low, distant howl. Not wind, not storm. A creature. Tanu paused mid-motion, eyes narrowing. Sura stilled, listening. Kaha's heart thumped in his chest. Another howl. Closer this time. Long. Hungry. Wolves. Tanu rose slowly, pulling on his outer hide coat. "They smell the smoke from the quillik," he said, "and the fat. They will circle the village." Sura nodded calmly. "You will not go out alone." "I will go to the Elder Lodge," Tanu said. "They will send watchers." He placed a hand on Kaha's shoulder. "Stay inside with your mother." Kaha nodded, though he desperately wished he could follow. As Tanu stepped into the cold night, the wind swallowed him instantly. The howl came again, louder, sharper. Wolves often grew desperate in the early months of deep winter, and a pack testing the village was not uncommon. But each visit required vigilance and strength. Inside the lodge, Sura moved quickly but without panic. She added more fat to the quillik, then dimmed the flame slightly to prevent the scent from drifting too far. "Kaha," she said gently but firmly, "bring me the hides." He obeyed at once, his small hands trembling slightly. She wrapped the entrance more tightly, sealing any draught. Outside, the wolves' voices echoed through the night like ghosts drifting across the tundra. But inside, the lodge remained warm, protected, calm. "Are the wolves dangerous?" Kaha asked. "Wolves are hungry," Sura replied. "Hungry things are always dangerous, but afraid things are even more dangerous. That is why we stay steady." She touched his cheek. "And that is why we survive." The wolves circled the village for hours. But the people of Kaskimin were ready. Watchers patrolled the lodges. No fires burned to lure predators closer. No food was left unguarded. Knowledge, not weapons, kept danger at bay. When Tanu returned later that night, his boots coated in frost, the howls had faded into silence. "They have moved on," he said, lowering himself beside Sura. Kaha exhaled softly, relief warming his chest. Another night survived, another lesson learned, and winter still far from over. By the next morning the sky had taken on a strange pale glow, one that almost resembled daylight but carried none of its warmth. In the far north, the sun in deep winter was not a presence, but a suggestion. It hovered somewhere beyond the horizon, distant and indifferent, offering only the faintest silver shimmer to remind the people it still existed. Kaha stepped outside with Tanu as Sura secured the lodge door behind them. The air was so cold that even sound seemed to freeze. Footsteps made no noise. Breath fell like powder. The village lay unmoving beneath the weight of winter, as if time itself had slowed. Yet there were signs of life everywhere, if one knew how to see them. Faint trails where the watchers had walked during the night. A set of wolf prints circling the outer lodges before veering off toward the distant ridge. The tiny hopping marks of an Arctic hare near the snow wall. Every track was a message, and Tanu read them the way other people read words. "Look here," Tanu said, kneeling beside a set of shallow indentations. "Tell me what you see." Kaha crouched, squinting. The prints were small, almost delicate, like the marks left by a creature too light to sink into the snow. "Hare?" he guessed. Tanu shook his head. "Fox. The hare hops. The fox walks. See the line? A light-tail drag." Kaha leaned closer. Now he could see it. A faint streak, barely visible. Tanu smiled. "Good. The land speaks quietly, but when you learn its language, it tells you everything." They continued walking toward the eastern ridge where the villagers often set their traps. There was no hunting today. Animals stayed hidden during the coldest days, but checking traps was essential. A single catch could provide a day's nourishment for one family, sometimes two. As they walked, the snow beneath them changed texture. It became denser, crunching faintly beneath their boots. Kaha noticed the difference, but wasn't sure what it meant. Before he could ask, Tanu said, "This snow has melted and refrozen. Beneath it is ice. Be careful." Kaha stepped carefully behind him. Every aspect of this land required attention. Carelessness could cost toes, fingers, or lives. When they reached the first trap, Tanu brushed aside the top layer of snow and inspected the wooden frame, which protruded subtly from the drift. Kaha knew the design well, built from a single piece of curved driftwood held taut with sinew. It was simple, elegant, and deadly to small game. But today it was empty. "No sign of struggle," Tanu murmured. "The cold keeps everything still." They moved to the next trap, and the next. All empty. Kaha's shoulders slumped. "What? If the animals do not come this winter?" Tanu paused. His breath drifted between them like a slow-moving cloud. "They will," he said, "but not while the storm's shadow is still heavy. Animals know the land better than we do. They wait for the wind to sleep." "So we wait too?" Kaha asked. Tanu nodded. "We wait, we watch, and we prepare." Patience. Another skill of survival. As they approached the final trap near the ridge, Kaha sensed something different. The air smelled sharper, colder, as if the wind carried news from someplace far beyond the snow horizon. Then he heard it, a faint snapping sound. Tanu froze, raising a hand. Not an animal, not the wind, something deeper. A crack echoed through the ridge like thunder muffled by snow. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Kaha's eyes widened. "Tanu, what is that?" "A shift," Tanu said quietly. "Ice beneath the ridge is moving. The freeze is deepening." Another crack thundered across the plain. A section of distant snow slid down a slope in a slow, silent wave. Avalanche. Not near them, not dangerous, but a reminder. This land was alive, restless, powerful. Tanu knelt at the final trap. He brushed aside the snow, and Kaha leaned forward to see. Inside lay a single creature. A ptarmigan. Its white feathers blended seamlessly with the snow, but its form was unmistakable. A gift from the land. Kaha's face lit with excitement. We caught one, Tanu nodded. A small bird, but enough to feed us tonight, and maybe tomorrow. He handled the bird with gentle reverence. Nothing was taken without gratitude. The people believed every animal gave its life willingly to those who respected its spirit. Kaha held out his hands to carry it. The feathers were soft, thick, perfectly evolved for the cold. This bird lives in the deepest winters, Tanu said. If the ptarmigan still moves, winter has not defeated us. They began the walk home. The sky dimmed again, erasing even the pale glow of earlier. A long stretch of darkness lay ahead. But Kaha felt lighter, as if the small bird carried hope within its feathers. When they returned to the lodge, Sura greeted them with a quiet smile. She examined the ptarmigan, smoothing its feathers. "A good catch," she said. "Enough for the three of us." As she prepared the bird, Tanu showed Kaha how each part would be used. The meat for nourishment, the feathers for insulation, the bones for needles and hooks, the skin for binding materials. Nothing wasted. The qualic lamp burned steady as Sura cooked the meat slowly over heated stones placed inside a shallow stone basin. The fat melted and sizzled, releasing a rich aroma that filled the lodge with warmth and comfort. Kaha's stomach growled loudly. Tanu chuckled. "Your body knows it must store strength. Winter requires it." When the meal was ready, the three of them ate in quiet satisfaction. The warmth of the bird spread through their bodies, easing the lingering chill in their bones. Later that night, when Kaha curled beneath his caribou hide blanket, he felt a deeper understanding settle into his heart. Survival here was not about battling the land. It was about listening, adapting, respecting. And this was only the beginning. The next morning began not with sound, but with vibration. A low, distant rumble, felt more through the feet than heard through the ears, moved like a deep whisper beneath the hardened snow. Kaha stirred under his blankets, unsure at first whether he had dreamed it. But then it came again, a slow, rolling tremor that shivered up the lodge walls. Sura opened her eyes immediately. Storms, animals, winds, these she could sleep through. But the shifting of the frozen earth was something different altogether. Tanu was already sitting upright, listening with his entire body. "It's close," he murmured. Kaha blinked at him. "What is?" "The river," Tanu replied. "It's sealing itself." Kaha pushed himself upright, confused. "Sealing?" Sura nodded gently. "When the river freezes completely, the ice presses inward. Sometimes, when the pressure grows too strong, the ice shifts. It is the land adjusting." Another tremor passed beneath them, softer this time. Kaha imagined the river, vast and black beneath its frozen shell, sighing under the weight of winter. The idea was strangely comforting, as if the land itself was alive and simply settling into sleep. Tanu rose and pulled on his outer furs. "I'll check the ridge and the river mouth. If the ice has shifted too much, we may need to move the traps." Sura frowned. "Take 2 others with you. The river edge is dangerous when it seals." "I will." Kaha stepped forward. "I want to go." Tanu shook his head without hesitation. "Not today. The river changes quickly. It is not safe." Kaha's cheeks heated, but he lowered his gaze. He knew better than to argue, not when nature itself was unpredictable. Instead, he helped Sura prepare the morning work. She gave him tasks carefully chosen to build his skills, checking the wall seams for cracks, brushing frost from the hides, helping cut strips of sinew, keeping the colic lamp trimmed and fed. These were not chores. They were survival. Every small act strengthened the lodge, the family, the winter ahead. As the hours passed, the rumbling faded into silence. The village emerged slowly from the dim twilight of the long night. A few children played near the snow mounds, their laughter a rare reminder that even in harsh winters, joy had space to breathe. Kaha watched them but stayed inside as Sura instructed. He wanted to join them, to feel the sting of cold on his cheeks and the crunch of snow under his new boots. But his mother's instructions were clear and not to be questioned. She caught his longing glance and gave a small, knowing smile. "The world is training you," she said gently. "Sometimes it trains you with patience." Kaha sighed, but nodded. Sura handed him a small piece of hide and a bone needle. "Then practice. Your stitches are improving." Kaha took the materials and settled beside her. For a while they worked quietly, The only sound, the soft crackle of the lamp flame and the whisper of wind brushing the outer hide. Then, without warning, a sharp cry pierced the air outside. Kaha's head jerked up. Sura froze, listening carefully. The cry came again. High, panicked. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. Sura moved quickly to the doorway. "Stay here," she instructed Kaha firmly. But Kaha, despite his mother's warning, followed as far as the inner doorway and peered out. Across the village, near the snow ridge, 2 children stood shouting and waving their arms. A third child, a girl, was knee-deep in a patch of snow that looked wrong. Too smooth, too soft, a snow sink. Sura's voice rose above the wind. "Do not move! Stay still!" Tanu and 2 hunters sprinted across the village, appearing from the far side like shadows materializing from the snow. Tanu reached the girl first. He moved slowly, testing the ground with his spear, distributing his weight as he stepped. The snow sink was not a simple hole. It was the fragile roof above an air pocket created by shifting wind and drift, stable on the surface, hollow beneath. One wrong step and the child could fall deeper, into suffocating powder. Tanu stretched his arm toward the girl. "Hold my hand." She reached out, trembling. Slowly, inch by inch, Tanu pulled her free. The snow around them sagged but held long enough for him to lift her safely into his arms. The watching villagers exhaled as one. Kaha's heart pounded. He felt both fear and awe. His father hadn't rushed blindly. He had moved with the same quiet precision he used for hunting, tracking, and reading the land. Calmness was not just a skill, it was protection. As Tanu carried the girl back to her family, Sura placed a gentle hand on Kaha's shoulder. "This," she said softly, "is why you learn, why you practice, why you listen." Kaha swallowed. Could she have? Sura nodded once. Snow can take as quickly as it gives. Tanu returned shortly after, brushing frost from his eyelashes. "She's unhurt," he said, "just frightened." Sura breathed a quiet sigh of relief. Kaha looked up at his father. "How did you know what to do?" Tanu sat down beside him. "Because the land teaches us the same lessons again and again. If we pay attention, we survive. If we stop paying attention—" He let the sentence fall into silence. Later that afternoon, Tanu and 2 hunters left to inspect the river. Sura and the other women reinforced the snow walls around the village, packing them tightly with wooden paddles. Children were forbidden from playing near the ridge unless accompanied by an adult. Kaha spent the afternoon helping Sura repair a tear in a hide window covering. Though it was less exciting than exploring the ridge, he felt a renewed determination. Every stitch, every repair, every task was another thread in the web of survival. When Tanu finally returned, frost clinging to his beard, he looked weary, but unharmed. "The river is sealed," he announced, strongly. "The fish beneath will be slow, but the ice will hold." Kaha's eyes brightened. "Does that mean we can fish?" Tanu nodded. "Soon. First, we prepare the tools. Tonight, we begin." Kaha felt excitement flicker warmly in his chest. Winter was harsh, unpredictable, powerful, but it was also a teacher, and he was ready to learn. Night settled over the village like a heavy blanket, deep and blue. Stars glimmered faintly beyond the slow drifting veil of snow. The air outside was sharp enough to sting Kaha's nose as he stepped out beside Tanu, but excitement warmed him from within. Tonight, he was going to learn ice fishing. Kaha had seen others do it before, watched from a distance as hunters carved neat round holes into the river's frozen back and pulled shimmering fish from the dark water. But he had never done it himself, never held the tools, never felt the deep connection between the people and the river that sustained them. Tanu carried a bundle of tools wrapped in sealskin, an ice chisel, a bone-handled pick, and a small wooden frame for the line. Kaha carried the smaller bundle, thin bone hooks polished smooth and coils of sinew. The path to the river mouth had been trampled earlier that day. Their footsteps creaked against the snow, a slow rhythm that echoed softly through the night. A few other hunters walked with them, their silhouettes long and quiet against the snow. Sura watched from the lodge doorway, her lamp flickering behind her. She gave Kaha a small nod, permission, pride, and warning woven together. The river appeared as a long silver plain ahead, its surface gleaming under the moon's reflection. It stretched endlessly, like a sleeping giant. "Stay close to me," Tanu said as they stepped onto the ice. Kaha nodded. He could hear it. The faint groaning beneath the surface, not dangerous tonight but alive. The river always spoke if one listened. The hunters stopped at a point where the ice had thickened enough to anchor tools. Earlier Tanu had tested it with careful strikes. Now he knelt, motioning for Kaha to do the same. "Watch," he said. He lifted the ice chisel and drove it downward with a clean, sharp strike. Crack! Thin white fractures spidered outward. Again. Crack! The circles grew deeper. Kaha watched closely. Every movement was efficient, clean, purposeful. After several minutes, Tanu stepped back. "Your turn." Kaha took the chisel carefully. It felt heavier than he expected. His gloves made his grip clumsy, but he set his stance just like he'd seen Tanu do. He struck. The chisel skidded to the side, barely scratching the surface. Tanu hid a smile. "Straight down. Let your arms do the work, not your shoulders." Kaha tried again. This time the chisel sank with a satisfying bite. He felt a surge of pride, but the work was only beginning. Strike after strike he worked the circle deeper. His arms burned. His breath fogged the air. Sweat collected under his furs despite the cold. When at last the ice thinned enough, Tanu used the pick to lift the final disk of ice free. It slid away with a soft splash, revealing a round, black mouth in the white world. The water below was silently moving, endless and dark. Kaha leaned over carefully. The cold rising from the hole was shockingly sharp. "This water," Tanu said quietly, "keeps us alive, but we must respect it." Kaha nodded, feeling the truth of the words in his bones. Tanu demonstrated how to tie the hook to the sinew line, wrapping it neatly around the wood frame. Then he handed the line to Kaha. "You set the lure, gently. Let it drift." Kaha lowered the line into the hole. The darkness swallowed the bone hook instantly. He felt the gentle tug of the slow current, like the river was tasting the offering. For a long time there was nothing but silence, punctuated only by the occasional crack of distant ice shifting. Then Kaha felt it, a faint vibration in the line, almost imagined. He froze. "Tanu, shh, feel it." The vibration came again, stronger this time, a pull, a flicker of life. Kaha's heart hammered. "It's biting." "Not yet," Tanu whispered. "Wait, wait." The line jerked suddenly. "Now!" Kaha pulled upward with both hands. The line whipped through his fingers, icy and vibrating with force. The fish fought, twisting wildly, but Kaha held firm. His arms strained against the motion. Then, a flash of silver broke the surface. A river char, fat and gleaming. Kaha gasped as Tanu scooped it onto the ice with practiced ease. The fish flapped, scattering crystals into the air. "You did well," Tanu said. "Your first winter catch." Kaha could barely breathe. His hands trembled, part from cold, part from exhilaration. Other hunters murmured their approval. A small rite had passed. A thread of connection, child to hunter, land to life, tightened. They continued to fish for another hour, catching several more char and a small whitefish. When the cold finally began to stiffen their limbs, Tanu called for them to head back. As they returned to the village, Kaha's steps felt lighter than the snow beneath them. He carried the small bundle of fish in his arms as though it were treasure. Sura met them at the door, her eyes immediately finding the fish. "You caught one," she said softly. Kaha nodded, unable to hide his grin. "A char." Sura touched his cheek gently. "Then you have strengthened us all." Inside, the lamps glowed warm. The smell of broth drifted through the air. Kaha sat beside the fire watching as Sura cleaned the fish and set his catch aside with special care. Tonight, it would be added to the stew. Tonight, he had provided. And in the quiet glow of the hearth, Kaha felt something subtle shift inside him. Not pride exactly, but a deeper understanding. He was no longer only learning to survive, he was learning to contribute. The cold deepened as winter tightened its grip. Snow dunes rose like slow-moving waves, reshaped each day by wind that howled across the plains. Even the trees, those few skeletal sentinels surviving on the distant edges of the valley, seemed to groan under the weight of white silence. Yet inside the village life continued with a patient, deliberate rhythm. The next morning Kaha awoke to a soft tapping sound. At first he thought it was the wind hitting the hide walls of their lodge, but the pattern was too steady, too human. When he pulled aside his sleeping furs, he found Sura kneeling near the doorway, tapping a small bone needle against a strip of hardened hide. "Good," she murmured as she saw him stir. "You should be awake for this." Kaha rubbed sleep from his eyes. "For what?" "You're strong enough now to learn winter sewing." He was not expecting that. He had imagined that after his success on the ice, he might be sent again to fish or help with the next day's hunt. Sewing felt quiet. Too quiet. Sura read the thought in his expression and smiled, though her eyes remained serious. "We survive with hunters," she said, "but we endure with makers." She reached for a bundle wrapped in cloth and pulled out long strips of hide. Soft caribou, thin but warm, already scraped and stretched. "These," she said, "will become boots." Kaha blinked. "Boots?" "Winter takes its time," Sura replied. "So must we." She placed the bone needle in his hand. It felt tiny compared to the chisel he'd held the night before. Fragile, almost weightless. But Sura held it with the reverence of someone handling a blade. "Your boots are old," she said. "Too thin at the heel. You will make new ones." "But myself?" "Yes," she said. "Your hands must learn all parts of survival." Kaha took a breath. Fishing had been a test of patience and strength. Sewing, it seemed, would be a test of care. Sura guided him step by step. How to fold the hide to match the curve of the foot, how to pierce the edges without tearing, how to pull sinew thread tight enough to bind but not enough to crack the material. "You listen to the hide," she said. "It tells you what it allows." Kaha concentrated, tongue pressed against his teeth, breathing slow, as he pushed the needle through the hide. The first few stitches were ugly and uneven, pulling the hide into crooked shapes. Sura watched but didn't intervene. "Again," she said simply. He tried the next row. Better, but not good. Again. Hours passed. The light outside shifted from blue to white, then to grey. The wind rose and fell, rattling the entrance flap. Still, Kaha stitched. His fingers numbed, then warmed again, from constant movement. When frustration rose thick in his chest, he forced himself to breathe how Sura taught him. Slow, steady, thoughtful. Finally something changed. The needle moved more smoothly. The sinew tightened with a clean pull. The hide folded neatly around his palm. A small row of stitches, almost straight, almost even, appeared beneath his fingers. Sura leaned closer, examining his work. Her nod was small, but it glowed like a warm ember. "You're learning," she said. Kaha exhaled slowly. That nod meant more than any feast or hunt. By midday, half the boot was shaped. By late afternoon, the sun had dipped behind the white hills, and lamplight flickered over their hands. At last, Sura placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Enough for today. Rest your eyes. Tired eyes make crooked boots." Kaha set the hide aside, flexing his stiff fingers. "Is sewing always this hard?" Sura chuckled softly. "Everything worth learning is." She placed the nearly finished boot beside him and began preparing herbs for the evening stew. Kaha watched the steam rise, feeling both exhausted and satisfied. But the day was not over. Just before dusk, the village stirred with the low calls. Shadows moved outside. Kaha peeked out of the lodge flap and saw Tanu approaching with 2 hunters. Across their shoulders hung the unmistakable shape of a large creature draped in thick fur. A reindeer. Its legs trailed in the snow, antlers heavy and wide. It had been a successful hunt. Kaha rushed to help, as did several villagers. The hunters laid the reindeer on the cleared ground near the central lodge. Even in death, the animal radiated the quiet dignity of something shaped perfectly for the cold. Tanu placed a hand on Kaha's arm. "Come, you should see this." Kaha followed. The air carried the metallic tang of fresh blood, mingled with the clean scent of frozen fur. "You learned ice fishing," Tanu said. "You learned sewing. Now you learn the cycle." "The cycle? Nothing is wasted," Tanu replied. "The animal gave itself. We honour it by using all that it offers." He handed Kaha a small obsidian blade. "Stand with me." The hunters knelt and began their careful work, opening the hide with measured incisions. The steam rising from the animal's warmth drifted into the icy air like a final breath. Tanu guided Kaha's hands, showing him how to cut without tearing the hide, how to press the blade against the natural lines of the muscle. The work was slow, but purposeful. Kaha began to feel the rhythm of it, like ice fishing, like sewing, patient, precise, connected. He felt no revulsion, only respect. By the time the work was complete, the meat had been separated, the fat collected for lamps, and the hide rolled carefully for tanning. Even the sinew was set aside for thread. Nothing would go unused. Tanu wiped his blade clean and glanced at Kaha. One day, you will be the one who teaches this. Kaha felt warmth spread across his chest, deeper than any fire. As night fully settled, the village smelled of stew and burning oil. Laughter drifted through the cold in small weary bursts. Life continued. Kaha crawled into his sleeping furs that night with aching hands, a tired back, and a quiet sense of belonging. Winter was not defeated by strength alone. It was endured through skill, patience, respect, and the shared labour of many hands. The next morning dawned without light. Snow clouds had swallowed the sky, leaving the world a dim, grey emptiness. The wind pressed against the lodges in low, groaning waves, and the air carried the unmistakable scent of an approaching storm. Kaha felt it the moment he woke, the heaviness, the stillness before winter bared its teeth. Sura, already awake, moved quietly around the lodge, tightening seams, checking the oil in the lamps, and packing furs closer to the sleeping area. She didn't speak, but her movements were loaded with meaning. A storm was coming, and a strong one. Outside, voices rose in short bursts, men calling for rope, women gathering pots and tools, elders giving instructions. The village wasn't panicked, storms were expected, but every person moved with purpose. Kaha pulled on his thickest furs and stepped into the cold. The wind cut at his face like tiny knives. Snowflakes swirled in frantic spirals, stinging his eyes. Tanu stood near the central lodge, tightening the lines that anchored it to thick wooden stakes in the ground. Even his movements were quicker than usual. "You woke just in time," he said without looking up. "Help me check the east stakes." Kaha hurried to assist, pulling on the frozen rope until it creaked under the strain. The stakes were solid, buried deep, but the wind pushed against the structure with a force that made the hide walls ripple like water. "How long will the storm last?" Kaha asked. "Perhaps a day," Tanu said. "Perhaps 3. The wind decides." As they worked, an elder approached, a tall woman with long, grey braids and a voice that carried even in a storm. Her name was Akiri, known to Kaha as the Storm Mother, not because she summoned storms, but because she always seemed to know when they were coming. She gestured for Kaha to follow. "You should learn how we prepare the lodges," she said. "Storms test the walls as much as they test the people." Kaha nodded eagerly and followed her to one of the smaller lodges at the edge of the settlement. Snow whipped around them, though the storm had not yet reached full strength. "Watch carefully," Akiri said as she crouched beside the lodge. "When the winds come from the north, the snow builds here along the seam. If left, it will freeze into a heavy block and tear the hide." She used a wooden scraper to brush away the packed snow and showed him the narrow gap beneath the hide covering. "You pack soft snow in this space," she explained. "Not hard snow. Soft snow turns to insulation. Hard snow turns to ice." Kaha nodded, taking the scraper and trying it himself. His fingers were quickly numb from the cold, but the work was simple and rhythmic. Scrape, lift, clear. Scrape, lift, clear. "You learn quickly," Akiri said with a small smile. "Your hands will remember this when your mind does not." By midday, the wind had grown fiercer. It screamed across the open plain, pulling at clothing, trying to push people off balance. Visibility shrank. The world dissolved into white. Akiri called out, "Enough! Everyone inside!" One by one, families retreated into their lodges. Kaha hesitated, watching as the snow thickened into a wall of swirling frost. Tanu appeared through the storm and grabbed his shoulder. "Inside, now!" They ducked into the warmth of the lodge just as the storm unleashed its full fury. The wind roared like a living creature, angry, relentless, unending. Snow hammered the hide walls, piling quickly along the seams. The structure creaked, though it held firm. Inside, the light from the seal oil lamp flickered. The air was warm but tense. Sura sat by the firestone container, slowly stirring a pot of broth. Tanu settled near the entrance flap, listening to the wind as though it was speaking a language only he understood. Kaha wrapped his furs tightly around him. For a time, no one talked. The sound of the storm was too loud, too overwhelming. It pressed against their ears, their ribs, their thoughts. Outside, the world howled. After a while, Sura broke the silence. "Storms are part of winter," she said softly. "They teach us humility. They remind us not to rush, not to wander too far, not to take the calm days for granted." Tanu nodded. "And they teach patience. Only a fool fights the wind." Kaha stared at the flickering flame of the lamp. What happens if a lodge is damaged? Sura exchanged a glance with Tanu before answering. "We repair it, even in the storm. We do not leave people unprotected." Tanu added, "But that is why we prepare. A well-built lodge is a shield. You've helped strengthen that shield today." Kaha felt a small glow of pride. Hours passed. The storm did not weaken. Instead, it seemed to grow teeth. The pressure outside made the hide walls bow inward like the surface of a drum. Kaha found himself imagining what would happen if the stakes failed, if the lodge tore open and the wind rushed in with its icy claws. His stomach tightened at the thought. Perhaps sensing his fear, Sura placed a hand on his shoulder. "Winter is harsh," she said gently, "but we are harsher." From the way she said it, he believed her. Later that evening, after the storm had been raging for nearly 12 hours, Tanu stood. "Time to check the snow levels," Kaha blinked. "In this?" Tanu smiled faintly. "Storm or no storm, the snow must be cleared. If it builds too high, the weight can collapse the wall." He handed Kaha a small fur-lined hood and tightened it around his head. "You're coming with me." Kaha swallowed hard but nodded. He wasn't going to back down. Together they braced against the lodge wall and pushed through the entrance flap. The wind slammed into them instantly, wild, roaring, almost alive. Snow swirled so densely that Kaha could barely see Tanu, even though he was only an arm's length away. They crawled along the wall, using their hands to push away the snow gathering at the base. The cold bit through their furs, trying to force them to retreat. But Tanu kept moving, and Kaha followed. The work was brutal, hands numb, wind deafening, snow stinging his face like sand, but he kept going. When they finally stumbled back inside, breathless and soaked with frost, Sura wrapped thick furs around them and handed them warm broth. The heat seeped into Kaha's bones. "You did well," she said. "Storms show a person's true strength." Outside, the wind roared on, but inside, Kaha felt steady, grounded by the knowledge that he had faced the storm, and the storm had not broken him. The storm lasted through the night, and then through the next morning. By midday, it had softened only slightly, still fierce, but less feral, as though the wind had begun to tire. Kaha awoke to the muted roar of wind pressing against the hide walls. His body ached from the previous night's work, his arms heavy, his fingers stiff, his legs feeling as if the storm had tried to pull him off the earth. But he had slept deeply. The exhaustion had swallowed him whole. Sura sat near the lamp, mending a small tear in her gloves. Tanu was by the entrance again, poking a thin stick through the flap to check the height of the snow outside. "It's still rising," he murmured, "but slower now." Kaha crawled from his sleeping furs. "Do we need to clear it again?" "Soon," Tanu said. "But the wind has calmed enough that we won't have to crawl this time." Kaha felt relief at that. Crawling through a blizzard felt like something only a snowfox should attempt. Sura poured warm broth into a wooden bowl and handed it to him. "Eat slowly," she said. "Your body needs warmth as much as the lodge does." He obeyed, savouring each sip. The broth was thin, made from the bones of the reindeer and a handful of dried roots, but its warmth spread through him with comforting steadiness. Outside, the sound of voices began to return, soft at first, then stronger. People were emerging into the storm's weakening light. Tanu tied his boots and stood. "Let's go see what the night left behind." Kaha dressed quickly, layering furs until he felt more like a walking snowdrift than a boy. When they stepped outside, the cold hit him, but not with the violence of the night before. The wind tugged at him rather than shoved. Snow still whipped through the air, but the flakes were smaller, softer, drifting sideways like playful spirits rather than missiles. The village looked transformed. Many of the lodges were buried halfway up their sides, shaped into rounded hills of white. Only the tops of some structures peeked out, their wooden supports like ribs poking through snow. Other villagers stood nearby, using broad wooden shovels to move the drifts away. Children darted between them, laughing despite the cold, their faces red and eyes bright. Kaha felt a quiet thrill. This was the aftermath of winter's trial, and they had endured. Tanu pointed toward the central lodge. Snow had piled almost to the roof's midpoint. "We start there." Kaha nodded and began to push snow away with his gloved hands. It was lighter than before, fluffy rather than packed hard by wind. His breath puffed clouds around him with each movement. Tanu worked beside him, clearing the upper slope. After several minutes, Akiri approached, leaning on her carved wooden staff. Her braids were dusted with snow, and her eyes gleamed with the quiet wisdom she always carried. "You survived your first true storm," she said to Kaha. He straightened, brushing frost from his sleeves. "It was harder than I imagined." Akiri gave a knowing smile. "Storms shape us. They remind us that the world is larger and stronger than we are, but they also remind us that together we can face anything." She lifted her staff and pointed to the horizon. The clouds were beginning to thin, revealing patches of pale blue. The storm was finally breaking. Kaha felt a sense of triumph, not loud, not celebratory, but deep and grounding. When the central lodge was cleared enough to stand safely, Tanu clapped his hands to gather attention. "We must check the lines on all lodges. Some may have loosened in the wind." Everyone nodded, dispersing to different parts of the village. Kaha followed Tanu to the eastern boundary. Here, the snow had drifted into enormous shapes, like frozen waves crashing against the lodges. One structure, belonging to the family of a hunter named Aruk, was nearly submerged. Aruk and his wife were already digging. "We're here to help," Tanu called over the wind. Together they worked quickly. Each scoop of snow revealed more of the lodge's surface. As they dug, Kaha noticed a small tear in the hide seam where ice had pressed too hard. "Tanu, there's damage." Tanu knelt beside him and examined the tear. It wasn't large, but it would widen quickly if wind caught it again. "We'll repair it now," Tanu said. "Good eyes, Kaha." Aruk's wife hurried inside to fetch repair materials, a strip of softened hide, sinew thread, and a bone needle nearly as long as Kaha's hand. They worked side by side, holding the hide tight against the lodge wall while Tanu stitched. Kaha pressed the seam firmly, feeling the vibration of the needle through the hide. When the repair was complete, Tanu knotted the thread and leaned back. "That will hold the rest of the season," he said. Aruk clasped Tanu's arm in gratitude, then did the same to Kaha. "You helped save our home," he said. Kaha's face warmed more than the cold could cool. By late afternoon, the entire village had emerged from beneath its snowy armour. Lodges stood sturdy again. Paths were cleared. Tools were gathered. People spoke to one another with the ease of those who had shared a hardship and come out stronger. As the light faded from the sky, the clouds finally parted completely, revealing a band of soft, glowing pink. The storm was gone. Winter had quieted again. That night the village held a small gathering, not a feast, for food was precious, but a warm circle of voices and stories beneath the shelter of the central lodge. Akiri spoke first. "The storm has tested us," she said, "and as always we answered it with strength, skill, and unity." Then she looked at Kaha. Even the young stood firm. Kaha felt every eye turned toward him, some proud, some amused, some full of respect. His cheeks flushed under the attention, but he held his head high. He had endured the storm, and he had earned his place in the memories of the people. When the gathering ended and the lamps were dimmed, Kaha crawled into his furs, exhausted but peaceful. Winter had shown its power, and so had he. In the days following the storm, the world settled into a deep, bright calm. The sky cleared completely, revealing an endless dome of blue, so sharp it felt like polished stone. Sunlight bounced off the snow with fierce brilliance, turning the village into a landscape of white fire. But with that beauty came an even more dangerous cold, the kind that didn't roar like the storm, the kind that didn't shout or whirl or claw. This cold simply sat, a silent, unyielding force that seeped into everything, the kind of cold that cracked wood, stiffened leather, and bit straight through bone. Kaha felt it the moment he stepped outside that morning. The air was so sharp it felt as if it could cut the inside of his nose. His eyelashes grew stiff with frost within seconds. Even the snow beneath his boots didn't crunch, it squeaked, a sound that only came with the deepest cold. Tanu emerged behind him, pulling his fur hood tight. -40, he said simply. Kaha stared at him. How can you tell? Tanu shrugged. You feel it. You see it. You hear it. He gestured at the snow beneath their feet. That sound only happens when the cold sinks past a certain point. Listen long enough, and the winter teaches you everything. Kaha looked around. The world seemed frozen in place, unmoving, breathless. But the village was already awake. Women carried frozen buckets of ice toward the lodges, where they would be melted for drinking water. Hunters checked their gear, inspecting the sinew bindings for splits caused by the cold. Elders warmed their hands over seal oil lamps, the flames tiny but steady. Everyone moved slower today, not from fear, but from respect. This kind of cold punished recklessness. Kaha, a voice called. He turned to see Aruk waving him over, a bundle of tools at his side. We're reinforcing the windbreaks, Aruk said as Kaha approached. The storm weakened some of the posts. The next wind could take them down. Kaha nodded eagerly. He remembered how the storm had battered the village, how the windbreaks were the first line of defence. Without them, the lodges would take the full brunt of the cold winds. Together they trudged to the outskirts of the settlement, where tall wooden stakes stood in crescent-shaped rows half buried in frost. Snow had drifted heavily against them, pressing the poles toward the ground. Aruk handed Kaha a stone mallet. Strike here, he said, pointing to the base of one post. The frost shifts the earth. You have to remind it where strong ground is. Kaha positioned the mallet and swung. The post shuddered, shedding a thin veil of snow. Good, Aruk said. Again, stronger. Kaha struck harder, feeling the vibration travel up his arms. Even through thick gloves, the cold seeped into his fingers. Aruk laughed softly. Winter trains your body whether you want it to or not. They worked like that for almost an hour, moving from post to post, hammering, straightening, clearing snow. The cold made each movement heavier, slower. Their breath rose in white clouds, drifting sideways like smoke. When they reached the last row, Aruk paused and lifted his chin toward the horizon. Look there. Kaha squinted. Far in the distance, tiny figures moved across the snowy plain. A group of hunters, returning from a long-range expedition. Their silhouettes were bowed under heavy packs, their steps careful and deliberate. Even from afar, Kaha could sense their exhaustion. Aruk exhaled slowly. 3 days out in this cold. They'll have stories. Sure enough, when the hunters finally trudged into the village, their faces were red and raw, crusted with frost. But their eyes shone with triumph. They carried with them bundles wrapped in hide, inside preserved fish, dried meat, and long strips of caribou hide. Supplies, more precious than gold in this cold. The entire village gathered to welcome them, offering warm broth and heated stones to thaw their hands. Even the elders stepped forward to greet them, touching their foreheads in the traditional gesture of gratitude. Tanu approached one of the hunters, a tall man named Roken. You went farther than expected, Tanu said. There was no choice, Roken replied, voice hoarse. The river farther east had not yet frozen fully. We used the open pockets to fish. That far east? Tanu's eyebrows lifted. Dangerous ground, Roken nodded. We lost one sled to thin ice, but the catch was worth it. Kaha felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the realization of how much risk the hunters took to keep the village alive. Later, as the hunters rested inside the central lodge, Tanu and Sura gathered Kaha near the fire. There is something you should learn today, Sura said. She reached behind the fire pit and pulled out a small bundle tied with sinew. Inside was a braiding of dried herbs, wintergreen, willow bark, and crushed spruce needles. This, she said, is winter medicine. Kaha leaned closer, inhaling the fragrance. It smelled sharp, earthy, grounding. When the cold sinks into the bones, or when breathing becomes difficult, this tea warms the body faster than fire. Tanu handed him a wooden bowl filled with hot water. Add 3 pinches. Kaha did as told, watching the herbs unfurl and release their scent into the steam. Not all warmth, Sura said, comes from fire. Some warmth comes from knowledge. She let the tea steep, then gave it to Kaha. The first sip was bitter. The second was soothing. By the third, warmth spread through his chest like sunlight beneath the skin. He looked at them in wonder. "This helps us survive without fire?" Sura nodded. "When wood is scarce, when driftwood does not wash ashore, when storms steal our kindling." Her voice softened. "Knowledge keeps us alive." Kaha held the bowl tighter. There was so much he still didn't know, so much he wanted to understand. The cold outside deepened as night fell, but inside the lodge, warmth lingered, soft, steady, patient. Kaha sipped the winter medicine and listened to the distant wind whispering across the ice. He felt stronger than the day before, more aware, more prepared. Winter still held its power. But so did he. For the next several days, life in the village settled into a rhythm defined by the cold, by caution, and by the unspoken agreement that everyone must pull a little harder during the deep winter. Kaha found himself waking earlier than before. The cold didn't frighten him the way it once had. It called to him, an invitation to rise, to work, to learn. This morning the air held a stillness that hinted at change. Not a storm, not a thaw, just a shift. Even the elders, as they warmed their hands over the lamps, paused to sniff the air thoughtfully. "Today is a carving day," Sura announced after breakfast. Kaha blinked. "A what?" Tanu grinned. "Time for you to make your first winter tool." Sura handed him a wrapped bundle. "For now, you learn the basics. Form before finesse." Inside the bundle lay a slab of driftwood, pale, smooth, heavy, and a small chisel made from a piece of sharpened bone. Kaha frowned. "But what am I carving?" Sura tapped the wood with her finger. "A wedge." "A wedge?" Tenu laughed. "Don't worry. Every hunter, every scout, every builder starts with a wedge." Kaha's brow furrowed. "That sounds simple." "That's the point," Sura said. "Simple things decide whether shelters stand, whether ice cracks the way you want it to, whether you can split frozen meat without breaking your knife." She handed him the chisel. "Make it sharp. Make it even. Make it strong." Kaha followed them outside to a sheltered corner near the windbreaks. The cold stung his cheeks instantly, but the air was dry, bright and stable. Good carving weather. He sat on a low block of packed snow, balanced the wood on his knees and lifted the chisel. "Push with your shoulder, not your wrist," Tanu instructed. "The cold makes wrists stiff. Shoulders stay steadier." Kaha adjusted his posture and began carving long, steady strokes. Each curl of wood fell into the snow at his feet, pale shavings that sparkled like frost. It felt awkward at first. His gloves bunched, his fingers stiffened. But slowly, the wood responded to him. The wedge began to take shape, broad at one end, narrowing cleanly toward the other. "You're holding your breath," Sura said without looking up. Kaha exhaled sharply, startled. "How did you—" "Everyone does it when they start," she said. "Breathe with the movement." He tried again. Chisel forward. Exhale. Chisel forward. Inhale. Gradually the carving found rhythm. By midday, Tanu examined the shape. Good, strong lines. A little rough at the edges. Kaha perked up. "So it's ready?" "No," Tanu said. "Now you sand it." "Sand?" Kaha stared. "With what?" Sura handed him a small pouch filled with something gritty and grey. "Cold sand. Crushed river stone." Kaha poured some into his palm and rubbed it along the wedge. The friction warmed his hands despite the freezing air. The grit smoothed the wood bit by bit until the surface felt even beneath his glove. By the time he finished, his shoulders ached. His fingers burned with cold. His cheeks were raw, but in his hands lay a perfectly shaped wooden wedge. Tanu brushed his thumb along the grain. "Very good." Sura smiled. "Now you can split ice." Kaha blinked. "Ice." Tanu stood and motioned for him to follow. They walked toward the frozen shoreline where the sea met the land in a long wall of blue and white. The ice here was thick, glacial, ancient, but along the cracks it formed sharp, vertical sheets perfect for harvesting fresh blocks. Tanu pointed to a narrow seam where two slabs met. "Drive the wedge here," he instructed, "then strike it with your mallet. The ice will follow the line you make." Kaha swallowed nervously. "And if I miss?" "Then the wedge shatters," Tanu said simply, "and you carve another." For a moment Kaha wondered if Tanu was joking. He wasn't. Kaha positioned the wedge carefully at the seam. The cold radiating from the ice made his fingertips ache even through the gloves. He lifted the mallet, remembering to use his shoulder, and struck. A dull thok rang out across the ice. "Harder," Tanu said. Kaha swung again. Thok. A faint crack rippled along the seam. He struck again, and a clean sheet of ice slid free, shimmering like glass as it toppled gently into the snow. Kaha stared at it, stunned. I did that." Tanu clapped a hand on his shoulder. "And you'll do it again. We harvest ice for water, for carving, for cooling food in the spring hunts. This is the winter's stone." Kaha bent down and touched the slab. It was smooth, clear and powerful, like holding a piece of ancient time. As they returned to the village, the wind shifted slightly, carrying a faint sound, distant, hollow, unfamiliar. Sura stopped walking. Tanu froze beside her. Kaha looked between them. "What is it?" Sura's eyes narrowed at the horizon. "The ice is speaking." Kaha held his breath. He felt nothing, heard nothing, but then... Whoom! A deep, resonant groan rolled through the air like thunder trapped beneath the ground. The sound vibrated in Kaha's bones. "The ice field is moving," Tanu said quietly. "Pressure shift." "Is that dangerous?" Kaha whispered. "Not yet," Sura replied, "but it means the sea beneath is restless." Restless. The word chilled him more than the air. As they resumed walking, Kaha glanced back at the horizon. The frozen sea looked unchanged, white, silent, endless. But now he knew it wasn't still. It lived. It breathed. It shifted. And somewhere beneath that frozen shell, something powerful and ancient was moving. The echo of the shifting ice lingered in Kaha's ears long after the sound itself faded. Even when the village walls came into view, tall and rounded under layers of snow, he kept glancing back at the frozen horizon. It looked peaceful, almost serene. But now he knew better. The ice could lie. Back inside the settlement, the elders gathered near the central dome, discussing the sound that had rolled through the valley. Their voices were calm, but beneath that calm ran something else, a kind of alertness, sharp as a blade hidden beneath soft cloth. Sura brushed snow from her cloak and led Kaha toward the shelter. "Winter speaks in many voices," she said. "You must learn to hear all of them." Kaha tried to hide the unease in his voice. Does it mean danger?" "Not tonight," Tanu said, joining them. "But when the ice shifts like that, it means the sea below is changing. Pressure, temperature, currents. Something is moving." "Could it break?" Kaha asked. Sura shook her head. "The great ice? No, but large cracks can open where the sea is thinner. Hunters must know the signs." They stepped inside the dome, the warmth of the oil lamps wrapping around them in a soft amber glow. For a moment, Kaha allowed the heat to ease the cold in his bones. Inside, the village was alive with quiet movement. Children helping polish tools, elders tending the lamps, hunters repairing sled parts. Life continued. Always. Tanu handed Kaha a bowl of warm broth. "Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we test your footing." "My footing?" "Walking the outer ice," Tanu said. "But don't worry. We'll start with the safe regions." Kaha nearly dropped his bowl. "The outer ice?" Sura smirked. "If you want to survive here, you must trust the surface you walk on. Learn where it sings, where it softens, where it hides traps. You will walk beside us." Kaha swallowed hard. "And if I step wrong?" "You won't," Sura said simply, "because you'll listen." Later that night, while the rest of the village began settling down, Kaha lay awake, listening to the small, steady crackle of the lamps. The sound was oddly soothing, gentle, rhythmic, predictable, not like the deep groan from the sea. He closed his eyes, but sleep came slowly. His mind drifted to the stories he'd heard as a child, tales of frozen spirits beneath the ice, of ancient creatures slumbering in the depths. He'd never believed them, but now, after hearing that sound, Kaha wasn't sure. A faint crunch of footsteps outside the dome caught his attention. Someone walked past, humming an old winter tune. The melody was soft, almost like a lullaby, safe, familiar. Kaha finally exhaled and let the tension in his shoulders fade. The village was calm, the lamps were steady, the ice had groaned. Yes, but the people here had heard such things 1,000 times. Tomorrow he would learn to walk the ice, to understand it, to trust it. Perhaps then the fear would fade. Morning arrived quietly, as it always did in the deep winter. No sunrise, no warmth, only a slow brightening of the sky from black to a muted blue-grey. Kaha stepped outside the dome, pulling his hood tight as the cold stung his cheeks. Breath drifted from him in soft, ghostly clouds. Tanu waited near the main path with a pair of thick, fur-lined boots slung over one shoulder. "For you," he said, tossing them to Kaha. Kaha examined them. "These aren't mine." "They're better," Tanu replied. "More grip on ice." Sura appeared beside them, already adjusting her harness. "We're starting with the inner shelf. It's the safest, but listen carefully. The ice always warns before it breaks." Kaha felt his pulse quicken. "And if it doesn't?" Sura smiled. "It always does. The question is whether you hear it." They set off, passing through the village gates and heading toward the long expanse of frozen ocean. The wind was calmer today, whispering instead of howling. It carried the faint, salty scent of the distant sea trapped beneath the ice. After a short walk, the land gave way to the vast sheet of frozen blue, the inner ice shelf. It stretched endlessly, its surface etched with pale, winding lines that resembled veins. "This part is stable," Tanu said. "It's where the sea currents are slowest." Sura knelt and placed her palm flat against the ice. "Before you step onto a new patch, feel it. Always." Kaha copied her, pressing his glove to the surface. The ice felt shockingly cold, but beneath the cold was something else, a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat slowed to an ancient rhythm. What is that?" he whispered. "The sea," Tanu said. "And it never sleeps," Sura added. They walked forward. The ice groaned softly beneath their boots, but the sound was long and even, harmless, as Tanu explained. Long groans mean settling. The cold compresses the layers. "And short sounds?" Kaha asked. "Short sounds," Sura replied, "mean movement, cracks forming. You step back when you hear those." As they moved farther across the frozen plain, Kaha became aware of things he'd never noticed before. The subtle shift of the wind direction, the way the ice colour changed from pale white to deep blue where it thickened, how snow drifted in certain patterns where cracks might wait hidden. Tanu stopped suddenly and raised a hand. "Listen." Kaha froze. For a moment there was nothing but the distant whisper of the breeze. Then, tick, tick, tick. A rapid, stuttering series of sharp clicks. Kaha's breath caught. "Is that—" Sura nodded. "New crack forming, short, fast, very close." Tanu motioned for him to step back, away from the sound. "Slowly. Don't run. Running puts weight where you don't want it." Kaha swallowed hard and backed away, boots scraping gently. The clicking grew louder for a moment, tick, 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 then softened, spreading out until it faded into the distance. Only when the final sound disappeared did Sura relax her shoulders. "Good," she said. "You reacted quickly." Kaha tried to steady his breathing. "Does it always sound like that?" "No," Tanu said. "Sometimes it's a crack. Sometimes it's a hollow thump. Sometimes a soft pop. Each one tells you something different." Sura placed a reassuring hand on Kaha's arm. "You're learning more than you realize." They continued walking for another hour, stopping often for Kaha to kneel, listen, feel and study. With each step the ice felt less like a threat and more like a living map, one he was slowly learning to read. When they finally returned to the village, Kaha felt exhausted, but also strangely proud. He had walked the ice, he had listened, and for the first time the ice had spoken to him, and he understood. That evening, with the lessons of the ice still humming in his mind, Kaha wandered toward the central dome, drawn by the warm flicker of light spilling onto the snow. Inside, he found the elders gathered in a loose circle. Their silhouettes swayed gently in the glow of the oil lamps, shadows rising and falling like slow-moving waves. Elder Rami looked up as Kaha approached. "Come," he said. "You've learned the ice today. Tonight, you learn why it matters." Kaha settled quietly among them. The warmth soothed the lingering stiffness in his hands and legs. Rami leaned forward. "Every winter, the ice shelf becomes our shield, our path, our hunting ground, and sometimes our enemy." His eyes gleamed softly. "But beneath the ice, The world is never still. He picked up a carved bone figurine and set it in the centre of the circle. It resembled a fish, long, sleek, adapted for cold. This, Rami continued, is the winter cod. It swims deep, far beneath the ice, but during the coldest moons, it gathers where the sea is warmest, beneath us. Kaha frowned. Warm? But the sea is frozen? The surface is frozen, Rami corrected gently. But deep below, vents release heat. Life thrives there. Elder Sani nodded. When you heard the ice shift today, that was the sea adjusting to the great gatherings below. Kaha blinked slowly. The thought of entire schools of fish moving hundreds of feet beneath where he had walked made the ice feel thinner in his imagination. Does that change the ice? He asked. Yes, Sani said. Everything beneath affects the surface above. Fish move, currents shift, water swells, pressure builds. The ice warns us. Rami smiled. And you listened. That is the beginning. Sura entered the dome then, brushing frost from her sleeves. He did more than listen, he learned the rhythm. Tanu followed behind her, nodding approvingly. Tomorrow we take him farther. Kaha's stomach fluttered. Farther? Sura sat across from him. To the outer shelf. The hunters must test it before the storm moon arrives. Rami tapped the bone figurine. You'll learn to shape the ice to your will, to cut it, to build with it, to travel across it, and to respect it. Kaha hesitated before asking, What happens during the storm moon? The elders exchanged glances. Sani answered softly. The storms are the coldest nights of the year. Winds from the northern cliffs collide with sea winds, breaking smaller ice sheets. Hunters who walk the outer paths must know them well. And if they don't? Kaha asked. Sura's voice lowered. Some never return. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold slipped down Kaha's spine. But before fear could take root, Rami placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Fear can protect you if you respect it. But knowledge lets you move through the world wisely. Tanu grinned. Besides, you handled yourself well today. You didn't panic. That's because I couldn't feel my legs, Kaha muttered. The elders laughed quietly, easing the air in the dome. Rami lifted the bone cod again and tucked it into a small pouch. Tomorrow, he said, you learn what lies beneath the cracks. Kaha swallowed. Beneath the cracks, Sura nodded. You'll see how we gather water, how we fish without nets, how the cold becomes our greatest ally. Rest well, Kaha, Tenu added. Tomorrow we'll test your balance. Kaha bowed his head respectfully and left the dome. Outside, the night lay silent and pale, a vast blanket of blue-white light stretching across the frozen world. He glanced toward the horizon, where the ice shelf waited, quiet, unmoving, deceptive. Tomorrow he would walk closer to the edge, and the ice would test him again. The next morning arrived with a faint shimmer in the air, an almost imperceptible glitter that meant the temperature had dropped even lower overnight. When Kaha stepped outside, the cold clung to him like a second skin, sharp enough to sting through the thick fur around his hood. Tanu and Sura were already waiting, their breath visible in long drifting streams. Today, Sura said, tightening the strap on her harness, we go to the edge of the inner shelf. From there, the outer ice begins. Kaha swallowed. The part that can break, Tanu smiled. Only if you don't listen, but you will. They set off across the familiar stretch of inner ice. Kaha's boots found the rhythm naturally now. Heel, roll, toe, weight distributed evenly. Every few steps he lowered his glove to the ice, feeling for the faint hum that told him the surface was steady. You've learned quickly, Sura noted as they crossed a shallow ridge. Most newcomers take twice as long to sense the ice. Kaha shrugged, embarrassed. It still terrifies me. That's the correct response, Tanu said. After nearly an hour of walking, the landscape began to change. The flat plain of the inner shelf gave way to uneven formations, ridges rising like frozen waves and narrow troughs carved by ancient pressure. Sura slowed. This is the edge. Kaha stepped beside her and saw it. The faint line where the ice's colour shifted from solid frosted white to a deeper translucent blue. What's the difference? He asked. Thickness, Sura replied, and movement. The outer shelf rides on the sea, it flexes with it. Tanu pointed to a long dark crack that stretched across the surface. We stay away from those today. Kaha nodded but couldn't tear his eyes from the crack. It looked like a wound, dark, silent, waiting. Sura motioned for him to follow. Before we step onto the outer shelf, you must learn how we harvest water, Kaha blinked. Water, but we're surrounded by ice. Yes, Tanu said, but drinking the wrong ice makes you sick. Sura knelt beside a mound of snow-covered ice and cleared the surface with her gloved hands. Beneath was a patch of clear, glassy ice. This is young ice, she explained, frozen recently. Fresh water formed from melting snow and refreezing. Good for drinking. She drew a bone-handled chisel from her belt and began tapping lightly at the surface. The sound was crisp. Tock, tock, tock. Clean, not hollow. Listen, she said. This is what young ice sounds like. Hard, clear, pure. She handed the tool to Kaha. Your turn. With careful breaths, Kaha tapped the ice. The sound was indeed different. Higher, sharper. Nothing like the long groans of thick shelf ice. He chipped a small plug free and held it up. It sparkled like crystal. Tanu nodded approvingly. Now the difficult part, finding water beneath. They walked a short distance to a narrow channel, between two ice ridges. Thin mist drifted upward from the cracks. This, Sura said softly, is where the sea breathes. Kaha felt his chest tighten. It's open water? Not fully, Tanu said, but warm currents rise here. Meltwater collects below the surface. Sura gestured for Kaha to kneel. Listen first. He lowered his ear close to the ice. At first he heard nothing. Then, soft, subtle, like the whisper of a distant river, a gentle gurgling. His eyes widened. There's water down there. Fresh meltwater, Sura confirmed. Trapped just below thin ice. We cut a hole and collect it. Tanu looked at him seriously. Tomorrow we will walk the outer shelf, but today you learn to cut without breaking through. The meaning struck Kaha hard. If he cut too deep, if the ice fractured, he'd plunge straight into freezing water. He steadied his breath. I'm ready, he said quietly. And for the first time, he almost believed it. Kaha knelt beside the faintly steaming crack in the ice, watching the thin mist drift upward like breath from a sleeping giant. The chisel felt heavier than usual in his hands, heavier because he now knew exactly what waited just beneath the surface. Cold water, moving water, alive and merciless. Sura crouched beside him, guiding his grip. You don't strike the ice here, she said softly. You shave it. Tanu nodded. Like peeling bark, slow, controlled. The moment the ice changes sound, you stop. Kaha inhaled, trying to steady the slight tremble in his fingers. He placed the chisel at a shallow angle and pulled gently, scraping thin curls of ice. They fell silently into the snow, soft and delicate as feathers. Shh, shh, shh. Each stroke revealed a clearer layer beneath. The colour shifted from cloudy white to pale blue. That's it, Sura murmured. Small strokes. Let the ice tell you when you're close. Kaha focused on the sound. At first, the scraping tone remained steady. Then, subtle, he heard a faint difference. Not loud, not obvious, but there. The sound softened, took on a hollow edge. Stop, Sura said immediately. Kaha froze. You heard it, she continued. That hollow tone means the ice is thin there. One more cut and you'd break through. Tanu reached forward and brushed the surface. The ice flexed ever so slightly under his touch. Well done, he said. Kaha exhaled shakily. This is more nerve-wracking than walking the cracks. Sura chuckled. Good. It should be. With a small hooked tool made from caribou antler, she gently widened the thinnest point of the ice until a drop of clear water welled up from below. There, she said. Fresh meltwater, warmed slightly by the current. It will freeze again by nightfall. Kaha watched as she collected the water into a small sealskin pouch. It steamed faintly in the cold air. Why not melt snow for water, he asked. You can, Tanu said, but melted snow alone provides little strength, and you must burn oil to melt it. We save the oil for light and heat. The water beneath the cracks, Sura added, is the purest you can drink, and it restores the body faster than anything else in winter. Kaha nodded slowly. It made sense. Nothing was wasted. Nothing done without purpose. Every action fit into a delicate system perfected over countless generations. A sudden low rumble rolled beneath them. Not sharp, not dangerous, but deep and resonant. Kaha tensed. Is that? Tanu smiled. The sea shifting again. Normal on days like this. Sura stood, brushing snow from her knees. Enough for today. You've learned what you need. As they began the walk back to the village, Kaha felt strangely calmer. Not because the ice frightened him any less. No, the fear was still there, steady as his heartbeat, but because now he understood it. Fear was information. Fear was a teacher. And the ice demanded respect, not panic. They reached the village just as the sky dimmed into the colour of deepening dusk. Smoke curled from the lamp vents, and the scent of broth drifted through the air. People moved slowly, conserving energy, but their voices carried warmth. Rami approached them at the gate. "How did he do?" Sura answered. "He listened." Rami nodded approvingly and placed a hand on Kaha's shoulder. "Good, because tomorrow you will need all that listening." Kaha's brow furrowed. "Why? What happens tomorrow?" Rami's expression softened, but his eyes held a seriousness Kaha hadn't seen before. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "you step onto the outer shelf." A coldness deeper than winter slid through Kaha's stomach. Tomorrow he would face the ice that moved like breath. The ice that cracked like bone. The ice that could swallow a person whole. And he would have to trust himself. Dawn, if it could be called that in the dead of winter, crept over the village as a dim wash of blue-grey. The air felt heavier, quieter, like the world was holding its breath. Even the dogs curled tighter in their dens, sensing something different about the morning. Kaha stepped outside, gripping his gloves to stop his hands from shaking. Not from cold, from anticipation, the outer shelf. Sura and Tanu waited near the gate, their faces unreadable beneath thick fur hoods. They carried longer spears today, ice probes, not weapons. "That's new?" Kaha said uncertainly. Tanu lifted one. "Necessary." He tapped the end against the snow. The thin metal tip gleamed sharply. "These are for testing depth. Before you take a step, the probe takes it for you." Sura checked the straps on his boots. "Your footing must be perfect today. The outer shelf is not forgiving." Kaha swallowed but nodded. He followed them through the village gate and across the inner ice. The familiar groans beneath their feet were almost comforting now. Predictable, steady, part of the rhythm he'd begun to understand. But the comfort didn't last. After nearly an hour, the landscape shifted again. The ice became smoother, clearer, almost glass-like. Long fractures ran beneath the surface like frozen rivers, twisting deep into the blue. "This," Sura said, voice low, "is the beginning of the outer shelf." The air felt colder here, sharper, different. Kaha placed one foot onto the new surface. The ice responded with a soft, echoing ping. He froze. "Was that—" "Good," Tanu said. "That's the sound of tight ice. Strong. Move." Kaha stepped forward, heart thudding. They walked in single file. Tanu led, probing the ice with short, precise jabs. Each time the probe struck, the sound revealed something. Depth, density, danger. Sometimes a solid thunk, sometimes a hollow tuk-tuk, sometimes an unsettling wuff, like breath pushing through a thin layer. Whenever Tanu heard that one, he redirected their path immediately. Kaha listened, memorizing every tone. After 15 minutes, they reached a narrow ridge where the ice looked cloudier. Sura knelt and brushed snow off the surface. "The currents pass under here," she explained. "The ice flexes. This is where most mistakes happen." Tanu motioned to Kaha. "Your turn. Test it." Kaha gripped the probe tightly. He jabbed the ice gently. Tok. He tried again. Tok. Then, on the third strike, tuk. A hollow note. Wrong. He stepped back instinctively. Sura smiled. "Good. You heard it." But before Kaha could relax, a distant sound drifted across the ice. A deep, rolling groan. Not short, not sharp, long, heavy, ancient. The three of them froze. Tanu's expression tightened. "Pressure wave," he said. Kaha's heart skipped. "What does that mean?" Sura pointed toward the horizon. "Something large is shifting beneath us. Maybe a current, maybe a slow-moving pack of ice deeper out. It's not dangerous here, but it means the shelf is unsettled today." The groan faded, swallowed by the vast cold. But its echo lingered in Kaha's bones. Tanu turned to him. "This is why we test the shelf early in winter, before the storm moon, before the ice begins to drift." Kaha stared out at the endless blue-white plain. It looked still, silent, eternal, and yet it was moving. It had always been moving. Only now did he understand how alive it truly was. Sura's voice softened. "Kaha, you've done well today, better than most, but the outer shelf teaches slowly, and it punishes quickly." Kaha nodded, feeling both fear and something darker, deeper, respect. Tomorrow they would return. Tomorrow he would learn more. For now, simply surviving this first step felt like a victory. That night the wind returned, not as a furious blizzard, but as a slow, whispering tide that curled around the village like drifting breath. It slipped between shelters, brushed softly against the snow-packed walls, and sighed faintly through the hide seams. It was a calm wind, gentle for this region, the kind that carried stories rather than threats. Kaha couldn't sleep. He lay beneath his furs, listening to the crackle of distant ice shifting on the bay, each pop and groan echoing like someone tapping the world from below. Every part of him remembered the outer shelf, its bottomless blue fractures, its hollow notes, the long, unsettling groan that rolled through it like the voice of something ancient waking beneath the ice. Eventually restlessness won. He stepped outside. The world was dimly lit by thousands of stars shimmering so brightly they seemed to hum. A faint curtain of aurora shimmered across the sky, soft green folds waving gently like the slow pulse of a great sleeping creature. Snow crunched behind him. "You're awake too," Sura said, pulling her fur cloak tighter. Kaha nodded. "Hard to sleep after today." She joined him at the edge of the pathway, where the packed snow formed a natural bench. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the sky ripple. "Does the outer shelf ever stop moving?" Kaha asked quietly. Sura shook her head. "Never. The ice is alive, not with breath or blood, but with pressure, wind, current, moon. It's always shifting. It listens to the world above and below. And we walk on it anyway. That's why we learn to listen to it. Most people imagine the cold is the danger." She tilted her head, eyes following a ribbon of green light. "But the ice is the real keeper of death." Kaha shivered, though not from the temperature. "Do you still remember your first time walking it?" A slow smile crept across her face. "Oh yes, I was smaller than you, fell through once." Kaha jerked upright. "You fell through?" "Only up to my hips," she said, as if recounting a minor inconvenience. "I stepped on a shelf edge right after a pressure wave. My grandmother pulled me out before the current took me." "What did that feel like?" Sura looked up again at the sky, thinking. "Cold that feels like it's trying to grind into your bones. And time slows. It becomes thick, heavy. You hear everything. The crack, the water, the rushing undercurrent. But your body won't move." Kaha swallowed. "And you still go out there?" "We all do," she replied. "It's our land. We learn it or we die trying." A soft moment passed, the aurora shifting more intensely now, bright ripples fluttering like wings. Sura leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There is something else you should know about the ice." Kaha's breath stalled a little. "What's that?" "It remembers," he frowned. "Remembers?" she nodded. "The cracks from years past, the pressure ridges, the hidden pockets, they follow patterns, like old scars. Not exactly the same every year, but similar. The elders learn them, map them in their minds. That's why Tanu knew where to step today." Kaha thought of Tanu's absolute confidence, how he could read the ice with his probe, his eyes, his ears, his very feet. "But what happens when the pattern changes?" Kaha asked. Sura stared at the horizon. "That's when we lose people." A quiet heaviness settled over them. Kaha imagined unseen paths beneath the ice, shifting like the tides of another world. He felt small, less like a participant in the world and more like a guest who'd stumbled into something vast and ancient. A moment later, Tanu emerged from the shadows, carrying a small bundle of hides. "You two will freeze out here," he grumbled, though his tone carried no real displeasure. Sura smirked. "We're learning." Tanu sat beside them on the snow bench with an old man's groan. "You're learning tomorrow, not tonight." But he didn't send them away. For a long moment none of them spoke. The aurora swayed, and the faint groaning of distant shifting ice reached them like soft thunder. Eventually Tanu exhaled deeply. "I heard the pressure wave after you two went inside." Kaha blinked. "Another one?" "A big one, farther out." Tanu's eyes narrowed. The storm moon is close. The ice grows restless this time of year. We'll need to test farther than usual. Sura glanced at him. You think the shelves will drift early? Could be nothing, Tanu said. Could be everything. Kaha didn't know what that meant exactly, but he could feel its weight. Tanu suddenly nudged his shoulder. Don't tense up now. The ice listens, but it doesn't care about your fear. It only cares whether you respect it. Kaha nodded slowly. The words sank deep. Sura stood and stretched. Rest, both of you. Tomorrow will be harder. She walked back toward the shelter lights, vanishing into the warm glow. Tanu stayed seated, watching the sky quietly. You have good instincts, he said unexpectedly. Kaha blinked, stunned. I do? For someone new, yes. You hear the ice better than most. You step lightly. You pay attention. These things keep you alive. Kaha's chest warmed. Not with pride, but something steadier, more grounding. Respect. Belonging, maybe. Thank you, he said softly. Tanu rose to leave, but paused. Tomorrow we go to the White Ridge, the oldest part of the shelf, the one that remembers the most. Kaha's pulse quickened. The ridge? He asked. What's special about it? Tanu gave a thin smile. Out there, even the ice tries to hide its secrets. With that, he walked away, leaving Kaha alone beneath the shimmering green sky, heart pounding with a mix of fear and wonder. Tomorrow, Kaha thought, would be his greatest test yet. The morning of the White Ridge arrived without a sunrise. Instead, the world gradually turned from black to a deep, muted blue, a colour that felt like silence itself. Kaha dressed quietly, feeling the weight of anticipation settle across his shoulders like an extra layer of fur. Sura and Tanu were already waiting outside. Neither spoke. They simply nodded, and the three began their long walk toward the outer reaches of the shelf. Today the ice sounded different. Not angry, not peaceful, observed, as if it knew they were coming. The wind brushed across the surface, leaving fine trails of powder that swirled like smoke, revealing the faint gleam of thicker ice beneath. Kaha walked lightly, each step carefully placed, every sound catalogued, just as Sura had taught him. After nearly an hour, Tanu stopped. This is the border, he murmured. Kaha saw nothing unusual ahead, just miles of white, pale blue and frost. But Sura nodded with the seriousness of someone standing at an invisible cliff. The White Ridge never looks dramatic, she said softly. That's what makes it dangerous. Tanu used his probe first. Tok, solid. Another jab. Tok, deeper. Third jab. Tok, clear. He motioned Kaha forward. Your turn. Slow. Think before you strike. Kaha knelt, letting the cold press into his knees. He tapped the ice. Tok. Good. He listened to the echo, breathed, and tapped again. Tok. Tok. Then, tuk. A hollow note. Kaha, Sura whispered. His stomach tightened. There's a pocket beneath here. Tanu leaned in, nodding. Good ear, but this one is old. The ridge likes to keep its scars hidden. They circled the hollow spot carefully, marking its edges with small snow mounds, warnings for future travellers. This became the rhythm of the morning. Probe, listen, map the hidden wounds of the ice. Kaha learned to read the faintest changes, how a slightly sharper echo meant brittle layers, how a faint rumble deep below hinted at undercurrents shifting paths. But then the air changed. A low vibration rolled beneath his feet. Short, sharp, urgent. Sura froze. That wasn't normal. Tanu pressed his palm to the ice. His eyes narrowed. Not a pressure wave. Something else. Kaha felt it too. A subtle pulling sensation, almost like being on the surface of a drum tightening beneath him. What does it mean? He asked. Tanu stood. The shelf is moving. Sura sucked in a breath. Drift. The old man gave a grim nod. A small one, but enough to change everything. Kaha's pulse jumped. What do we do? We leave, Tanu said, turning immediately. Now. They retraced their path swiftly but carefully. No running, no heavy steps. The ice responded to weight differently during drift. One wrong move could send them through shifting seams. As they moved, Kaha noticed the landscape changing subtly. The cracks they passed earlier now slightly lighter, the surface more reflective, tiny crystalline lines spiderwebbing underfoot. The ice wasn't breaking, but tightening, rearranging. He swallowed. "It's alive," he whispered. Sura glanced at him. "Yes, and right now it's deciding where it wants to be." A long groan echoed across the plains, deeper than any they'd heard before, not violent but monumental, ancient, the kind of sound that made the hairs along Kaha's arms rise. "Keep moving," Tanu urged, but then, craa! A sharp crack split the silence. The ice just ahead of them opened, only a few inches, but enough to flash the dark water beneath. Kaha stumbled back. "We're trapped!" "No," Sura said quickly, eyes darting across the surface. "There's a crossing point. The current hasn't widened the crack yet." Tanu pointed. "There, see the darker band? That's where the ice is thicker." Kaha saw it, a faint grey streak crossing the crack like a hidden bridge. "We move one at a time," Tanu ordered. "Sura first." Sura stepped forward, testing the edge. The ice held. She crossed gently, using her probe for balance, each movement slow and deliberate. When she reached the other side, she nodded. "Kaha, your turn." He inhaled deeply, gripping his probe so hard his knuckles ached. The crack looked wider now, though maybe that was fear bending his perception. He placed one foot on the thicker band. The ice hummed softly beneath him. "One step at a time," Sura coached. "Trust what you've learned." Another step, another hum, another breath. Halfway across, the ice groaned. Kaha froze. "Don't stop," Tanu said. "Stopping is worse. Finish it." Kaha forced his leg forward. The ice flexed, bending just a finger's width. Then he was across. His breath rushed out in a shudder. Sura grabbed his arm, steadying him, pride shining in her eyes. Tanu crossed last, his movements precise as a hawk's. Once safely past, the old man looked back. The crack widened behind them with a sighing sound, as if releasing held breath. "We were just in time," Sura murmured. They continued back toward the village. The ice still shifted at their feet, but the rhythm had changed. It was stabilizing, slowing, settling into its new form. By the time the village's smoke-darkened hides came into view, the tension in the air had eased. Kaha stood at the gate, gazing out at the vast frozen world they'd crossed. The white ridge glimmered faintly in the distance, quiet once more. Tanu rested a hand on his shoulder. "You've walked farther than most outsiders ever will, and you listened. That's what keeps us alive." Sura smiled. "You understand now how they survived. Not through fire, not through shelter, but through respect, through knowing how the world speaks." Kaha breathed in the frigid air. For the first time, the cold didn't feel hostile. It felt honest. And somewhere beneath the ice, a faint groan sounded. Gentle this time, like a farewell, or a welcome. The test was over. But the memory of the ice would stay with him forever.